This episode of Food Psych is brought to you by my book, Anti-Diet, Reclaim Your Time, Money, Well-Being, and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating, which is available wherever books are sold. Just go to christyharrison.com/book to order it now. That's christyharrison.com/book. Welcome to Food Psych, a podcast about intuitive eating, health at every size, body liberation, and taking down diet culture. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm an anti-diet registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor, and author of Anti-Diet. Join me here every week as I interview interesting people from all different backgrounds about their paths toward peace with food and their bodies. And by the way, on this show, we bleep out diet culture stuff like weight and calorie numbers, but we don't censor swear words or other adult language, so listener discretion is advised.
Anti-diet revolution, we're for health at every size. Eat the foods you like. Food Psych.
Hey there, welcome to episode 268 of Food Psych. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and wow, what a week it's been since the last time I recorded one of these intros for you. I do these a couple weeks ahead, so I didn't include anything about the insurrection in the last one, but oh my God. I hope you're doing okay. I hope you're taking care of yourself and any anxiety and trauma stuff that's getting stirred up for you. I know I definitely had some of those reactions myself. I'm not going to talk about it at length here because we've got a great show for you and I want to get to that. But if you want to know more about my response and read a whole piece of writing that I did on this, you can go to my blog, christyharrison.com/blog, and we'll link to the post in the show notes for this episode as well. I'm still processing, and that piece, I think, is the best summation of where I'm at with all of this and my position on the violence, which of course I condemn and condemn the right-wing extremist thinking that led there. But there's lots more in that post, so you can check that out if you're curious. And meanwhile, we have a great show for you today because I'm talking with fellow anti-diet dietitian Dalina Soto about navigating boundaries, diet talk, and beauty standards in Latinx communities and the world at large, the lack of diversity in dietetics, what she learned in her first jobs as a Spanish-speaking dietitian, her relationship with her postpartum body, and so much more. I can't wait to share our conversation with you in just a moment. But first, it's time for Ask Food Psych. This week's question is from a listener named Farah, who writes, "Hi, Christy and team. I love your podcast and admire your work and passion. I would like to ask, for us who are on the journey of deconstructing ourselves from diet culture, but want to find joy in movement, what online exercise apps, instructors, and programs do you recommend? I've been looking quickly at a certain popular program and examined it with what I've learned from the book and podcast, and they don't talk about calories or changing shape, which gives me hope. I guess here I might be asking for cues you suggest, especially because most of these exercise platforms are on subscription, so I want to make sure they are free from diet culture before I pay. I'd love a list of online options to move our bodies freely, validated by Food Psych. Thank you." So thanks, Farah, for that great question. And before I answer, just my usual disclaimer that these answers and this podcast in general are for informational and educational purposes only, aren't a substitute for individual medical or mental health advice, and don't constitute a provider-patient relationship. So this is a great question, especially this time of year when diet culture's version of fitness is in full swing. I can't turn on the TV without seeing an ad for some kind of fitness app or program or piece of equipment. And so I think it's really important to think critically about the type of fitness that you want to engage with. I actually have a lot of recommendations for places to go for joyful movement that's free of diet culture. And so I'll give you those in a moment. But first, I just want to highlight that no one is obligated to do physical activity, period. And for some folks who are healing from disordered relationships with exercise, the best thing you can do might be to take time off from all structured activity. Of course, you might still have to walk to the subway or clean your house or things like that, But by not engaging in structured or intentional physical activity, you can allow your body and your brain to heal from the compulsive exercise that you were doing before. So to Farah and everyone else listening, I want to let you know that you have permission not to move your body if that's what you need. And it's not actually me giving you that permission, because really you have permission just by virtue of being human, no matter what diet culture might say to the contrary. So all of that being said, I do have some movement resources to recommend. And I know it can be hard to figure out what's good without signing up. So this is where I think knowing and trusting the instructor or founder of the program can be really key. And there are lots of joyful movement instructors who've been on the podcast who I just love. So first, I'm going to recommend some folks who teach yoga. And just a little plug for yoga, which is my favorite form of movement to recommend for anyone who's healing from diet culture and the punishing exercise that it pushes, which really is most of us, right? I like yoga because it's all about cultivating a self-compassionate and non-competitive and non-punishing attitude towards movement. And so yoga isn't just about the physical movement. It's also about learning to let go of the attachment to moving a certain way or looking a certain way while doing it, and the best yoga teachers will point that out in various ways over time. The best yoga teachers will help you realize that you don't have to look like them when you're doing the pose, that there are lots of different versions you can do that are all equally good for your body, or that there's no good and bad. There's no moral hierarchy of yoga poses and whether you can do things or not do things. It's not about pushing yourself to make these shapes that you see on the cover of yoga magazines. It's about getting in touch with your body and your own body's needs and wisdom. And so I really recommend yoga even, or maybe especially, for the people out there who think they don't like it and who prefer something faster paced and more competitive, which used to be me too. So I'm speaking from experience here. Yoga was one of the biggest tools in my healing from compulsive punishing exercise, and it has been for many, many, many other people as well. So with that plug for yoga, here are some great yoga folks who've been on the podcast who I highly recommend taking classes from. First, there's Diane Bondi, who has a program called Yoga for Everyone, and that's at yogaforeveryone.tv. We'll put links to all these in the show notes, so you don't have to remember them right now, but I'll just say the links in case you're somewhere where you want to quickly look. Dana Falsetti is another great yoga teacher who's been on the podcast. She has an online yoga studio, which is at studio.danafalsetti.com. There's Jessamine Stanley, who does The Underbelly, which is a great yoga platform, theunderbelly.com. Amber Carnes has a brand called Body Positive Yoga, and it's bodypositiveyoga.com. And then Anna Guest Jelly, who was on season 3 of the podcast way back when, one of the earliest seasons that's available still, or available without a Food Psych premium subscription anyway. But she has a brand called Curvy Yoga that's awesome, and that is curvyyoga.com. So again, all of these links will be in the show notes for this episode as well. And I'm sure there are others that I'm forgetting, other people who've been on the podcast who teach yoga too. So apologies if I'm leaving anyone out, but these folks and their resources are all great. And I know they all make a real effort to create spaces that are free from diet culture. So that's super important because even though yoga is this non-competitive, self-compassionate sort of practice, there are certainly teachers out there who might interpret it in a more diet culture-y way and actually not be super helpful when you're trying to heal from diet culture. And so finding a yoga teacher who is also fat positive and body positive, is important. And then there's some other great online fitness programs that you can do too. First of all, dance. I love, love, love Bevan Brand-Landingham's Fat Kid Dance Party. So much fun. It's at fatkiddanceparty.com. You can buy the video there, and it's super fun. And it has a part where you put your head up like a Muppet. And it makes me laugh every time. And then friend of the pod, Reagan Chastain, who's been on I think 2 or 3 times before and is just an awesome person, is a dancer. And she has a class or a series of dance classes called Dance for Everybody, which is at danceforeverybody.com. Then if you want more traditional fitness training or classes, which again, you don't need to do, and I invite you to really make sure that you're doing them because they feel fun and engaging, or they're helping you build strength in ways that are supportive of feeling good in your body, not because you're trying to shrink or reshape your body. But if you genuinely do want to do this kind of activity for fun and for self-care, there are some good anti-diet and pro-health at every size options too. So one fitness instructor and trainer who's been on the podcast, who I love, is Ilya Parker of Decolonizing Fitness, who offers sliding scale online training that is weight inclusive, trans-friendly, and disability-friendly. And they're at decolonizingfitness.com. And then if you want a program that has access to a wide variety of instructors and types of classes, so, boxing, yoga, strength training, chair exercises, all of these different things, there's the size-inclusive membership site Join, which is spelled Joyn, and it's at joyn.join.co, not .com, .co. And a lot of people in the HAES community have been raving about them. Another instructor I really like is Lauren Lavelle, who offers great fitness classes like bar and interval training through her company Lavelle Up. Her name is spelled Leavell, Lavelle, and it's lavelleupfitness.com. And finally, there's a site called Body Positive Bootcamp, which offers classes as well as virtual personal training too. So you can do one-on-one stuff, you can do group classes, and a former client of mine really loves them. And you can find them at bodypositivebootcamp.com. So again, all of those links will be in the show notes for this episode, which you can find at christyharrison.com/268. That's christyharrison.com/268. And I hope that gives you some ideas of things to try. And again, I really want to remind you that you don't have to do any of these things, especially if you're healing from compulsive exercise, especially if you're early in your eating disorder recovery. I want to encourage you to be mindful of how engaging in structured fitness might be affecting you, or even how thinking about it might be affecting you. And of course, if you're in eating disorder recovery and working with a treatment team, definitely talk to your treatment team and listen to their recommendations about engaging in fitness, because early on in recovery, it often is really helpful to take a break from fitness, from structured physical activity in any way. And potentially later on in recovery, you can start to reintroduce that stuff, but with the support of your treatment team to make sure that it isn't becoming compulsive again. So above all, just don't feel compelled to do anything that feels like it's coming from a place of diet culture pressure. Because as I'm always saying, an intuitive and peaceful relationship with food and your body and movement really comes from a place of self-care, not a place of self-control. So I hope that helps. And if you want to submit your own question for a chance to have it answered on an upcoming episode of the podcast, just go to christyharrison.com/questions. That's christyharrison.com/questions. And actually, I should say an upcoming episode of the podcast or the newsletter, because in my weekly newsletter, I do occasionally answer bonus questions because I get so many questions here and I'm never going to be able to answer them all. So I try to have a little bonus answer in the newsletter as well every so often. And you can subscribe to the newsletter if you're not already at christyharrison.com/email to get those bonus answers. That's christyharrison.com/email. And then, of course, the primary place to get your questions answered, the place where I will answer any question you like every single month and for as long as you like, you can come join my online course, Intuitive Eating Fundamentals, which is where I do a monthly Q&A podcast just for course participants, where you get to ask your own questions and answer to hundreds of answers I've already given to other people. So you can really start to put intuitive eating into practice in your life and get that individual support that we all so need in doing this work. But not only does it have individual support through those Q&As, we also have a private community forum just for course participants so that you can have daily guidance from me and my team, as well as hundreds of other great people who are on the anti-diet path, supporting you in relearning intuitive eating. And by the way, that private community forum is on my website. It's not on Facebook. We used to be on Facebook and moved over to a private forum server on my site a couple of years ago to help divest from Facebook and not have sort of all the noise of social media distracting you from connecting with fellow participants. So it's a really lovely experience. And a lot of people have said that they're super grateful that it's not just another Facebook group, that it's actually a private forum that's a lot less cluttered and where you don't have diet ads popping up on the side of the screen either. So if you're ready to break free from diet culture and reclaim the life it stole from you, come learn more and sign up for the course at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course, and I know we would love to have you. This episode of Food Psych is brought to you by my book, Anti-Diet: Reclaim Your Time, Money, Well-Being, and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating, which is available wherever books are sold. It's a great companion to this podcast because it has so much depth and detail in discussing diet culture and intuitive eating and health at every size and all the nuances of how diet culture harms us and how we can heal. And it has lots of scientific references and resources all in one place. So it's really kind of a one-stop shop for learning about the anti-diet approach. To get it, just go to christyharrison.com to find all the places you can order it, or really pop into any bookstore if you have bookstores near you that are open, and you can probably find it there. And by the way, if you've read the book already and loved it, as I know so many people have told me they have, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I would be really psyched if you left an Amazon or a Goodreads review, just because those reviews help more people discover the book. So does marking the other positive reviews as helpful. That helps grow the anti-diet movement and ultimately helps make the world a safer place for people of all shapes and sizes, including the very largest sizes. So thank you for reading the book or for planning to read the book if you haven't already. And I'm so grateful for all of you. And if you want to get the book, again, it's at christyharrison.com/book. And now, without any further ado, let's go to my conversation with Dalina Soto. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
I thought about this a lot because I knew you were going to ask me. And I really feel like my parents were very intuitive just on their own, like just natural intuitive eaters, or, not affected by diet culture that much, because I just remember it just being like normal. My parents never emphasized good or bad foods. They never really worried about like, were we eating too much? Like, it was just like a very chill environment. And my dad, even till this day, I joke around with him because I'm like, you're really intuitive. He's just very like, following his hunger cues, like, and he just listens to his fullness really well. He's just like such a chill guy. I'm like, you really taught us well. So to me, looking back, it's really interesting because in my household, there wasn't a lot of diety scenarios. It's when I would leave the house that I would see things, right? Like friends or even other family members. We had a group of friends growing up where they were very strict. And I remember, going out to Roy Rogers. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. There are like not a lot of them around. And this family would make their kids take this and they couldn't eat. And it was just like this big ordeal whenever we'd go out to eat. And my parents would be like, no, you could just have whatever you want. And I just remember seeing that struggle of other people, but like I never put it together, I guess, until I was like in the field.
That is so interesting. And I'm so curious, like sort of what got you from that place of like intuition and being able to eat what you want into the field and, attracted to dietetics in the first place, but also kind of curious around, because your whole brand is you're Latina nutritionist, like, right. It's like, specifically focused on Latina issues with food, and how interesting that like you didn't have any of that in your family, maybe somewhat in the extended family, but I'm curious kind of how that identity might have played a role in sort of shaping your relationship with food growing up too.
Yeah. So I had no idea what dietetics was, or I feel like a lot of people just don't know what it is, even now. So I actually, again, like these are things that you are thinking and you just don't realize. I shadowed a dietitian when I was in high school, but she hated her job. I mean, like it was not a great experience. She was just like super overwhelmed. I really didn't learn much from her. I really didn't even remember that she was a dietitian when I started school. It was just not like the best experience, but it's funny, like when you look back and you're like, holy crap, like I actually shadowed a dietitian and I didn't even know because she was not really happy in her job. But then I ended up going to Penn State and I always wanted to be a pediatrician. Like that was like, I would always say since I was a kid, I'm going to be a pediatrician. I'm going to be a pediatrician. And I started pre-med at Penn State. And then I don't like, sports. I'm not very coordinated. So I waited super long to take like the PE credit or sign up for it. And my advisor was like, you need it. So the only option you have right now is Nutrition 101. It would count the semester. So I was like, sure, I'll take it. And I took it. And it was, again, at that point, I was like, oh my God, I can go into a field with preventative care. And I can, again, because they talk a lot about disparities and how the Black and Brown population have such a high rate of disease. And I'm like, oh my God, I can go in. I speak Spanish. I can like change the world. And I was like, I'm totally switching my major, not knowing what the heck dietetics was, what was involved, an internship. Like I didn't know anything. I just kind of went over to my advisor and I was like, I want to switch my major. And I did. And looking back, I'm very grateful that I did because I do love my job, but I just had no idea. No idea what I was doing. And again, I hear a lot of people say, like, we drank the Kool-Aid, which I feel like, yes, I definitely was very much like, we have a problem in this country, a weight problem, and kids need to be educated on eating better. And I'm going to go do this in my, Latino community, and I'm going to be able to do this in Spanish. But all in the same breath, I knew that our cultural foods wasn't the issue, right? Like I knew that, again, white rice could be part of someone's everyday. And I also knew that body wise and just genetic wise, we were also different. So it was like a big inner struggle because I'm like, I'm learning this in school, but I also don't fully believe it. There's something missing. And it wasn't until I created my first Instagram account and somehow I started following all of you in this like Hayes intuitive eating world that I was like, okay, this makes so much sense. This is what I've been feeling this whole time. I just didn't know there was a word to connect it. I didn't know that there was a space that also believed in this. And that's kind of how my journey into Hayes and intuitive eating began.
That is so fascinating. So it sounds like you probably were able to maintain your intuitive relationship with food that whole time, or did you have any moments in the dietetics career when that shifted, or earlier too?
I think that there was definitely moments where I'd be like, oh my God, I need to cut my sugar. And then I tried and like not be able to like really care or not have enough like care to want to continue it. I feel like I definitely dabbled in like wanting to do the diety thing, but like not caring enough. Again, I have the privilege of being in what society would consider a thin body. And so for me, it was never like, I'm going to do this for weight loss reasons or to change my body. It was just because I wanted to be healthier, right? Like, oh, maybe I should try artificial sweeteners instead of regular sweeteners. And then I found out just how bad of a headache I would get from doing this. And again, it was very much from a point of like, I should be healthier because this is what I'm learning in school and I should do it. But it was never coming from, oh, I need to change my body. And I think when I was a junior, I studied abroad in Italy. And again, this is another experience where I was like, culture is just such a big part of who we are. And, I'm living in Italy, eating pasta, like it's nobody's business. And gelato, and just having like this very non-stressful life and feeling like I was in the best shape of my life, or not even shape, but just like health-wise, it just was so freeing not to have like all these stressors that I think we feel in the American culture. And again, that was another point where I was like, something's off, like something's just not right. Constantly always thinking that food is the issue.
So there was like this cognitive dissonance with what you were
Yes.
learning in your program for a
Very
long
much
time.
so.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I can identify with that. Like, not so much, I guess, sort of when I was in the program too. There were moments where I was just like, wait, this doesn't compute, especially when we had to do weighing and measuring ourselves and like that. I forget what that was. Nutrition assessment, I think, was the class.
Yeah.
Oof, that was rough.
Yeah. I just remember always thinking like, well, my butt's bigger here. Like I have boobs. Like something's just not right.
Right. Like, I don't fit this mold.
Yeah, I don't fit this mold. Yeah.
It sounds like that wasn't particularly distressing to you. It wasn't like I have to do everything to try to fit this mold. It was kind of like, okay, maybe the mold is broken.
Yeah. Thinking back again, I was I'm trying to think, there was only one other that I can remember, person of color, like in my cohort, that at least I was close with. But like again, I guess maybe I was naive at that point. Maybe it's because I was like away from home in a completely different place where I knew I was going to be the oddball out. But I never questioned. I don't think I ever questioned the science. I just felt like there has to be another way. Like I thought that maybe the research hadn't been done or people hadn't thought about it. Like, I don't know. I was very naive for sure.
And did you feel any sort of like demonization of cultural foods from the program?
Oh, yes. I got into a pretty heated argument during a course where, again, we were talking, I don't remember what we were talking about, but we were talking about just like food choices, and someone raised their hand and they were like, I just don't understand why someone can't take their kid to McDonald's and get, the apples instead of the French fries. And I remember at that moment getting so angry and being like, have you ever been to a low income community? Like, have you ever walked the streets of Philadelphia? Like, some people only have McDonald's to choose from, and they're not going to choose apples. They need to choose food that's going to sustain them. And I remember getting into like a really big argument and actually got asked to leave the class.
Whoa.
But
Oh my God.
because I was very angry. But like, yeah, there were definitely times like that. And I guess other microaggressions that looking back, sometimes I didn't act upon, but then other times I would definitely feel like it was more towards the end of the curriculum, like more of like my senior year. I feel like I experienced a lot of that, like those microaggressions, like you're not going to be able to work in the community. Like they're not going to want to talk to you. Like they're not thinking about being healthy, like more of like, it's going to be their fault and there's nothing that you're going to do to fix it kind of scenario. I feel like if anybody has like listened to my story or even like read my diversified dietetic blog, it was like a huge shock to me that, again, I worked all through my undergrad career, and not everybody gets straight A's, but in the dietetics world, it's very competitive and everybody has these 4.0s or like super high GPAs. And I remember having like a 3.2 GPA, but I had extracurriculars, I worked, and I went to my advisor and I asked her for a letter of recommendation, and she said no. She said, your GPA is not high enough and you want to work in community nutrition. You don't want to do clinical. And I just don't think you don't have what it's cut out to be in the dietetics world. And I remember like walking out and being like, are you kidding me? And like leaving there and going to one of my mentors who I worked in her lab. I was a translator for a huge study she had going on in Uruguay, and I would translate the video clips from moms. She was looking at iron and lead interaction in children and moms. And it was all in Spanish because it was Uruguay. And I was like kind of like coding and translating what was happening in the videos. And she was like, absolutely not. She was like really good at, again, I don't know where I would be if she wasn't there to kind of like bring me back up and be like, no, you are absolutely needed in this space. And then having all of the other professors in the lab being like, no, we're going to write you letters of recommendation, and having them as a support system. But I truly don't know where, if I would have continued in this career, if I wouldn't have had that support system from those other professors, because she was very blunt that I was not going to make it.
That's so shitty. Like,
Yeah.
I cannot imagine. And also to say like, well, you want to go into community, and so that's a mark against you. It's like, what? That is ridiculous. And yeah, like sort of, I mean, you can see just from that little interaction, it's sort of like a microcosm of why the dietetics field is so white, right? Like, and so privileged, not even just white, but like white upper middle class and middle class, because it's like people who didn't have to work throughout school who could do the straight A thing, or, people who had, the extracurricular, like the time for the extracurriculars in addition to the job where they like volunteer at a hospital or something like that, volunteer to get some clinical experience. Who has time for that if they're working to support themselves through school,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah. And like, I remember just knowing so many other, girls in the program whose parents knew dietitians or whose parents had connections and could, do the shadowing. I wasn't able to shadow anyone. I'm like, who the heck am I going to find to shadow? I have nobody. I mean, I was in 3 hours away from home in like a college town. I had no connections up there.
Yeah, that's the other thing. You have to have the connections in order to get those experiences. And then that's part of the whole matching process, right? Which for people who don't know, it's like this horrible, stressful process where you get matched to a program to do your dietetic internship after you do all the schooling. And the dietetic internship is generally unpaid, or in many cases, you have to pay them to be a part of it, like because there's classes involved. And so you're like paying and not getting paid, and it's horrible. And so that's another way that people of color and other marginalized people get weeded out, and lower income people get weeded out of the field.
Yeah. And it's this idea that you're not allowed to work. You have to give it all, right? You have to give 100% to this dietetic internship and to this career. And you're not allowed to divide your time. And me being afraid, as I'm applying, to say that I have a job because I don't want to get lower points because I know that it's going to be frowned upon. And also going into, the class, there's like a 1 credit class where they prepare you for the interview. And they're like, you have to straighten your hair. Like, you can't go with curly hair. Like,
What?
Yeah, like all of these things. And I'm like, well, I mean, this is my hair.
Oh my God. That is so racist.
This idea of like, you have to look this part, you have to wear these clothing. And like, again, like, I'm not, I know I have privilege. Like, my parents supported me, through school, and they bought me clothing for the interview process. And I had that privilege, right? I wasn't struggling to like, but I wanted to work and I wanted to have my own money because I always felt like I don't want to ask my parents for more. I don't want to ask my parents to have to send me money while I'm at school. Like, I can definitely do this. I know that I can. So it was very much my option to work and my want to work. But I know that there's people that don't have that option. There's people that don't have the ability to not work. They have to. But yeah, like all of that, like looking back again, at that point, I was very much like, yeah, I love my hair straight. I'll do it. But now looking back, these are like the microaggressions that you don't realize sometimes in the moment are happening.
Yeah. God, it sounds like a very microaggressive kind of place. Like,
yeah. I mean, there's the good parts, but I definitely, looking back, even when I think about all these things, there were definitely people that were just should not be educators.
Right. Seriously.
And I'm thankful that I had the support from these other professors that were definitely mentors.
Yeah, that's huge. That's everything, right? Because like you said, you wouldn't be in the field now if it weren't for them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have to like give a shout out to my mentor and former internship director, Dr. Gaba at CUNY Hunter College when I did it. Now it's the CUNY School of Public Health, I think. But she was amazing. She like really encouraged me to keep going when I was going to drop out because I was like, I can't do this. Like, I have this other job. I was freelance editing a giant series of books and was like, I'm making money doing this and I'm not making money and I'm paying to be in the internship. And I could like do this book editing thing full time while I'm, instead I'm like dividing my time and spending money to do this internship. Like what are those letters after my name really? I already have the master's, like whatever. And she encouraged me to stick with it and was like, you just got to get over this hurdle. And she was like, we'll find ways, like we can get your editing job to count as your food service rotation because it was like a cookbook series that I was editing.
Right.
And she got I had worked for 3 years at the Department of Health before I even applied to my internship. I just like always had to have a job in grad school because I had to work throughout the whole process of getting my master's and my DPD requirements, my dietetic, classwork done. And so I worked at the City Department of Health in these nutrition policy jobs for 3 years. And Dr. Geba was like, oh, these can count for your community. Like, done. You just gotten paid basically for this giant portion of your rotation. So really all I had left was the clinical and like, I think maybe one other small thing. And it was so much easier. And I'm so grateful for her for like making that possible. And I think a lot of continuing and returning students, because I was older when I went back to school, or 10 years older than a lot of people in the program. And there were a number of other like continuing and returning students who did that program, I think in part because it was so great at giving people credit for work that they had already done. And having a job was encouraged, not discouraged, which was amazing.
Yeah, one of my roommates was also in dietetics. Her dad was a doctor. And again, like she was able to get all of this like experience. She was younger than me. She actually was a freshman when I was a senior. So she was coming in. And yeah, she's like, yeah, my dad is a doctor. And during the summers, I shadow all these RDs at his hospital. I'm like, that's cool. Like, I've never done that. And I'm about to graduate.
Oh my God. I know. It's wild, the different levels of privilege that, and access that people have in this field. And then, yeah, the matching process is so competitive that it's like you have to be, I don't really know because I think I only applied to one match. I was like, I want Hunter or nothing because at the time, I even knew like they're really good about accepting prior assessed learning and I might be able to get some credit for this work that I've done and let's just see. And so I got it, but I didn't have a 4.0 either in my dietetics classes. Like at that point, I was 28 to 30 when I was taking the classes. I was just like, I'm not in this for, straight A's here. Like I have a job. I'm working full time.
Nobody cares about the crud cycle that bad.
Yeah, I'm just here to like, pass these classes so that I can move on and do this career that I want to do, So yeah, it was challenging. You did it, right? Like you got the match. You ended up.
I did not the first time.
Ah, yes.
I applied to Penn State and I applied to another school, which I applied to their master's program and their dietetic internship. They accepted me in the master's program, but did not accept me in the dietetic internship. And I was like, what? How would you accept me to one and not the other? But anyway, Penn State did rank me. We just did not match, which again, it's another very frustrating part.
Right, because the ranking, it's like they'll rank you in order of something and then you have to rank them the same in order to match.
Yeah, and I didn't rank them one. Yeah, well, because this is something, again, like an advisor should have told me this, which I didn't know. You get the acceptance letter to a master's program way before you do the matching process. Like I got my acceptance letter like in December. So I was like, cool, I'm definitely in. So I put them as number one. I put Penn State as 2 because I was so sure that if they accepted me in their master's program, why not also accept me in their dietetic internship? So I kind of shot myself in the leg because I didn't rank Penn State number 1. And usually when they match you, they're only accepting ones. Those are the first ones to get the match. I ranked them number 2, so I probably ended up lower in the totem pole, and all of the spots were filled up. And I remember, maybe I'm making this up, but anybody else that graduated in 2010, there were no extra spots that year. There was no like after process matching. So I was kind of like, okay, I guess I'll start my master's degree, which I did. And then I decided that like I wasn't going to apply to an internship until I was done my master's. I just didn't want to deal with all of that. And I was like, maybe it'll boost my ability to match if I'm completely finished the master's already. So I ended up doing that. And, you know, it worked out, I guess, but definitely something that, advisors should again, having that relationship with an advisor is so beneficial, but I didn't have that because she didn't think I was going to make it. So
Ugh, that is really frustrating. But you ended up getting the dietetics license.
yeah, I ended up, finishing my master's and I did all the courses. Then I applied for the internship. It was the school that I went to had that duo, like master's and an internship. I actually came back home and was living at home working and doing the master's at night. And then once I applied to the dietetic internship, I left that job. I was a nutrition educator and I ended up waitressing all during the dietetic internship. Then I passed the exam the first try because I was like, if I don't pass this time, I don't know if I'm going to take it again. I was like so over it. But I did. I passed and I was like probably one of the happiest days of my life because I'm like, I'm never going to have to do this again.
Yes, I remember that too. Just being like, this is behind me.
It's over.
So then you started in the field as a dietitian. Did you work in a diety setting? Were you in private practice right away, or how did that work?
So right out of actually the day that I passed my exam, I was offered a job, which was super cool. I had been applying prior to that because I knew when my exam date was. And I was offered a position as a Spanish speaking dietitian. Again, I did not realize the need that Philadelphia had for a Spanish speaking dietitian because there were so many jobs that I applied to because there are very few in the city even now. And I remember like being so overwhelmed at all the options. I'm like, holy moly, there's like all these jobs that I can apply to. And I ended up taking a job at kind of a wellness company. And I was working with the custodial team that was primary Latino and Spanish speaking. A lot of them didn't even speak English. So my job was to come in and kind of do nutrition education group wise and also do like individual nutrition education, which was a really cool experience. I really got to like hone in to my counseling skills, especially because my master's is nutrition counseling and education. And so it really brought it all together because I always knew I didn't want to do clinical. It was a really, really good experience to see, just how social determinants of health play such a big role in what's happening. I mean, I was working with the custodial team. Their shift was 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. So a lot of them would take, most of them were immigrants and they all lived near each other because they got each other jobs, right? And so they would wake up at 3 a.m., pick each other up in like a carpool, drive there, and have to work until 1 p.m. So their life was not something that I've ever even like seen before. Like they were going to bed at 10 p.m., 11 p.m. after they were done their housework or done helping the kids or like done doing everything else they had to do, right? And then wake up at 3 a.m. to like go work this job, to be home at 1 o'clock to like do it all over again. And it was, again, such an eye-opening experience because it's like, you can't ask people to sleep more. Yeah, you can, but are they? They have other shit to do. Like their priorities are their children, keeping their family fed and like keeping a roof over their heads. They're not worried about themselves. And so it really, again, put all of this into perspective. Like there's so much more than just nutrition and exercise and just helping them come up with like little things that they can do for themselves. So it was a very eye-opening experience. I was there for a year and then I was offered a job doing kind of like home home health almost. I was going to people's homes and doing nutrition counseling at their home, also in Spanish. And that was kind of like also my realm into more of the MNT portion of dietetics, even though it wasn't clinical.
Medical nutrition therapy for anyone who doesn't know. Yeah.
Medical nutrition, yeah. Even though I wasn't in a clinical position, I was still working with diabetics and, hypertension and all of those, medical terminologies that are used. And yeah, I did that for about 3 years. And then I started my private practice.
So through that time, were you starting to kind of get a sense of the health at every size model and start pushing back on the diety stuff that you had learned?
So no. So at that job, I did not have the ability to do that. It was very weight centric. And there was definitely a lot of things that I had to do that I was not comfortable in or with, again, because it was very much like number driven. How many, LBs did you help someone lose? They tracked a lot of those anthropometrics in order to be able to show progress to the companies that we were working for, insurance companies. And so it was definitely not always, I wasn't able to make decisions at all about how I wanted to counsel. But again, it was more of that eye-opening experience, like, again, having people with like a higher BMI, having to tell them that they needed to, lose weight, knowing damn well that they didn't need to because they were healthy, had no issues with anthropometrics, but the only one that I could show at that point that I was helping them was that, or that they were coming in specifically because they wanted that. And again, you had to show that you were helping them do this. And it was a lot because I'm like, this just didn't seem right. And again, that's when I started questioning a lot more of the health. I was thinking of haze, but I didn't know there was a word for it, or I didn't know there was a book. I didn't know there was anything to do with that until I left there. And then I started working in my own private practice. And then I started doing the research and just, again, finding all of you in this space and being like, okay, this definitely makes sense. And now I can do this because now I am in my own private practice and I make my own rules and I don't have to show numbers to anyone.
Yeah, I think that's such a key, right? To being able to do this work in an unfettered way is to have a private practice rather than be working for someone else or an organization that has weight as a metric that they track, and your quote unquote effectiveness or performance is measured based on how much weight people lose. Like, that's just such a difficult environment to try to make changes in.
Yeah. And when you have, when everybody else around you also doesn't understand that, it's really hard. Because again, not to anybody's fault at that point, you're taught these things at school, right? You're taught to be a dietitian in that way, and questioning it really brings up like, what the heck did I learn in school?
Totally.
Sometimes you feel like at the beginning, like such a fraud. I went to school and I learned all of these things. But again, coming from, I guess, a different background and growing up in a city with such high rates of poverty and just food deserts everywhere, I just knew that it just was not right. Like, I knew there was a piece missing, and being able to just like be on my own and read and study and go to conferences and just like immerse myself into all of this, it all clicked. And I was like, yeah, there's no going back now.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. It's like once you understand the flaws in the conventional weight science, it's really hard to go back to just standard nutrition advice.
Yeah.
How has that changed your relationship with the people you work with? And I'm especially curious too to see like what in the Latina community, because that's your primary audience, what are some of the specific challenges that people face and maybe that you face also in trying to help people heal from diet culture?
Oh, yeah. So it's so complex. I think something that I feel like a lot of the women I work with and I talk about is just this. The only way that I can explain it, it's like the American dream. Like, every country in like the Latinx world, it's like always trying to achieve, they want to be American. Like, I'm from the Dominican Republic, and I'm like, why are you all celebrating Thanksgiving and Halloween? Like, like how is that a thing now? Like that, but it's like this, like the United States, the land of the great. It's like the best place in the world. Everything is New York, New York, New York, at least from my experience as Dominican, right? And the ideal, right? The thin ideal here in the US is just so prevalent. And again, I think it varies though, because as Latino women, most likely than not, body shape is different, right? And so you're not going to be this like thin ideal. You're also going to have other body parts. And so it's mimicking this like small waist, super flat tummy, straight long hair. Like the Latino community loves Miss Universe and like pageants. And it's like that pageant look, right? Like when you look at TV, just Latino TV, these TV stations, everyone has the same look. There were no Afro Latinas ever growing up. Like, very rare. Everyone had this look, but then you look around you and you're like, that's not what we all look like. So again, it's like this mind fuck. I don't know how else to explain it. Like, everybody looks so different on TV, but you have to look like that even though you can't. Like, it's just not part of it. So there's like this whole different, I guess, it comes from a lot of angles, right? It comes from, you have, this ideal that's really hard to like achieve. And then there's this culture that loves food. And it's like you're being told in one breath, you have to eat everything, but you still have to look a certain way. And there is also some, like what I've noticed doing this work too, and kind of like, understanding a lot of the history behind diet culture and all of its, how it affects people. Just this theory of like control and controlling your children and telling them how they need to eat and how they need to act, like that's really big in the Latino culture. Like, you don't talk back to your elders, which is, it's such a just really hard to understand, because you don't want to be rude, right? But you also want to stand up for yourself. You want to be, respectful of your elders, which is what we're taught of. But sometimes our elders are so, outdated in the way that they're thinking, that they're really mean to you, or just really, just don't understand. It's really hard to learn new ways sometimes at that age, right? Some people are just not open-minded. So there's so much nuance that's lost. And what I find is that, again, even with the intuitive eating principles, or, health at every size, there's sometimes this piece that's missing, because it's like, but in my family, I can't do that. Like, there's not a word for boundaries. There's not, like, it's just the culture is different. And so I try to help navigate that in a way that's easier to understand, from stepping into the culture and saying, maybe this is how you can do it in a way that's, again, not going to offend someone or not going to be disrespectful, because that's really big. You don't want to be disrespectful to your grandmother.
Yeah. What are some ways that you've found people can do that? Because, I mean, that's so fascinating that there's not a word for boundaries, that concept.
No, we Googled it the other day in my group. It was really funny. It was a fun conversation. What we learned was that boundaries is not the word that's literally translated. Like, you cannot say boundaries. The literal translation of boundaries is fronteras, which literally means land boundary.
Right. Like borders or something.
Yeah, that's the border. So we kept looking, and the actual term is límites, like, so to set limits. So usually what I tell them, or how we navigate it, is never make it seem like you don't like their food. Like, never make it seem like it's because it's a very touchy situation. So I'm always like, use I statements. Super easy to do. You could just say, I am full. I ate. My stomach is going to hurt if I eat more. Like, I need to, kind of like take a breather and come back for it later. Because if you just say no, that's just not cutting it. They're like, but why no? You don't like my food? You don't like how it tastes? What's wrong with it? How can I make it better? Like there's all of these questions coming at you because they assume that something's wrong with their food because you're saying no. So if you're able to kind of describe a feeling, if you're able to say, I ate before I got here. I didn't know you were going to have food. So I'm just going to mingle or just talk, or I'll eat when I'm hungry in a little bit. It smells delicious. That really does help put into perspective, like to the other person, that you're not saying no because something's wrong with their food, but you're saying no because you're actually not hungry.
Yeah, setting limits. And I like that you can do it in a way that's respectful and polite, but also, nope, this is what I need.
Yeah, but always not offending.
What about like diet talk in your community? Like, because I heard you say on your podcast, which is great, people should check it out, on your first episode that like you've heard, maybe from your grandmother, I think it was, to wear a girdle or something, and just like,
no, my mom.
Or your mom. Yeah.
She put it on me when I had my first child and I passed out.
Oh my God. Yeah, because those things are not meant to help you breathe.
No, she definitely got sold something that was not meant for postpartum at my poor mom. She was like so afraid, like just like fainted. Um, so I think that also diet talk is everywhere. Everybody wants, again, to have that look. It's a very, very specific look. Like even the weather girl, I know that there's like, it made the news rounds a while ago. I don't remember when it was, but it was like the weather girl in some country, like I think she wore like a green dress, and then they kind of like, because it was a green screen, they were able to like change her dress. But it's like a very specific look, like it's just, if you look at any Spanish TV, the anchors usually have this look, the telenovela actresses have this look, like it's just very much that. And if you watch any novela, anybody that's in a bigger body or isn't white is either poor, hates life, has a total transformation in order to become popular. If they have curly hair, they straighten it. If you never see a Black person in main roles, I'll tell you that. Like they're always poor, like a peasant. It's horrible. It's horrible. Like there's just no rhyme or reason why this is still going on TV. But now they have like the new generation of novellas, which are a little bit more like narco related. It's all like the narco stories. It's so much. Oh my God, it's so much.
Also so like Americanized.
Yeah, diet culture is everywhere because again, I think that it's infiltrated our countries with like the no carb, like you shouldn't eat this, you shouldn't eat that, you should really watch what you're doing, you should watch your body, you should you shouldn't let yourself go. It's like all these ideas are being, again, perpetuated by the media, and it's trickling down through society. And I think the internet has made it worse. Just made it so much worse. It's really, really hard because it's everywhere. There's MLM companies that kind of like also, they emphasize certain communities or they target certain communities as well. And it's a lot. And we talk a lot about like how to change the subject or how to you have to sometimes set boundaries with yourself. Like my goal is to help you understand, kind of like see the other side, right? So I always say, you cannot walk away from diet culture. It's just like everywhere. So I want you to be able to set those boundaries for yourself, that you know why you're doing this. You know why you're so over trying to change your body and you're so over walking around hungry, that you're so grounded in why you're doing this, that little by little, you're going to hear these conversations. You're going to witness it on TV. And you're not going to get as angry and you're not going to let it affect you as much. And I always say, even if you fall for the trap again, I never want you to feel ashamed. I never want you to feel guilty that you fell for it again, because it's very persuasive. And I want you to have self-compassion to get yourself out. And really, that's my goal. I know that I can't fix everything. I can't fix everyone around you. But what I want to do is I want to help you be so grounded in why you're doing this work. and why you're respecting your body, that you're not going to get consumed by that again.
That's so important because I think you're right. Like we can't avoid triggers, they're everywhere in the world, but then especially if you're in a family where diet talk is rampant and it's hard to set boundaries with people and have the relationship stay intact, or it's like a delicate dance to try to word things in a way that is not going to offend people, then yeah, just kind of knowing for yourself what you believe, what your values are is really clarifying.
Yeah. It's this idea that like you can't change everyone around you. And so oftentimes it's, again, having those conversations with the people that you really want to continue to have relationships with and saying, I am happy. I am the happiest I've ever been, or I feel the best that I've ever felt. So why do I have to look a certain way for you to think that I am healthy or whatever the case may be? And sometimes, having those conversations is hard, but I've had, women I work with that have had these conversations with their mothers. And again, it's something that their mothers have never thought about, right? Because they've always been taught that a look is health, or they've always, they grew up thinking that way. And so even just having that initial conversation can change the trajectory of the relationship because it's not a conversation that's ever had.
Yeah, totally. I think that's so smart. And so I'm curious, just sort of as our last point to touch on here is, for you having kids, right? You have 2 kids and what that experience of pregnancy and postpartum was like. I mean, it sounds like postpartum, there was a little bit of body stuff going on from the outside.
Yes. So that's definitely been a journey for myself, just my postpartum body and accepting it. But yeah, like I shared this on another podcast. I don't know. I can't remember whose, and I don't think I've shared it on our podcast, but I always grew up listening to my mom say, I have 3 kids and my stomach has no stretch marks. Again, not that not that my mom has ever been super diety or had any body issues, but like she was so proud of that. Like that's something that she has always been super proud of because her friends had stretch marks or just people around her had stretch marks. And she was just always so proud that she didn't have any. And like, I remember being pregnant and like her buying me like lotions and like all of these things to like put all over my body. And when I got the stretch marks, it was just like, what the heck did I do wrong? Why am I not like you? Like we have the same genes. Everybody says that if your mom doesn't have stretch marks, then you shouldn't get stretch marks. It was like this whole to me, it felt like 1, I had failed her, and 2, my body had failed me because I did everything right. I drank the water. I, put all the lotions on. Like I was super active during my pregnancy. Like in my head, I was like, what did I do to deserve this? And it was such a struggle to accept them and be comfortable in my skin after having kids because I literally felt like I failed my mom and I failed as like a woman. I don't know why. It was just like this huge, overwhelming feeling that like I did something wrong and I got these stretch marks. Now I know, like obviously not the case. But again, society has conditioned us to believe, right? You see all these celebrities come out after having a baby and they're in like the cover of a, magazine with their like bikini on and you're like, what the heck? Like that's not really how postpartum bodies look. And then, having my mom, which again, or stomach binding after having a baby is normal in a lot of countries, not the kind of, faja, which is what we call them that my mom got me, or girdle. My mom got me something that was definitely meant, she was sold it from this store where they were like, this is perfect for postpartum. It'll get her stomach flat, like right away kind of scenario. And that's not the binding that's normal. Like binding is just like not even super tight, just like back support, regular, like let's help you with your back. You just, had a baby. Let's help you get your organs back.
Like a back brace kind of thing.
Kind of like that, but also some cultures do it to help like the uterus kind of go back, just like in a gentle bind. Definitely not what my mother got me. But again, she was sold that she was again getting her nails done. And this lady was like, I'm selling girdles. And she was like, oh my God, my daughter's about to have a baby. And she's like, it's perfect for postpartum. So here's my mom lovingly giving me this supposed to help me, snap back. And I'm in the hospital and she like puts it on and I'm like, I can't breathe. I'm like trying to walk and I kind of like passed out. And she's like, oh my God. And so I'm like, I'm never wearing this ever again. But yeah, just like this idea that you're supposed to like snap back and have this like perfect body afterwards. And her feeling like she had to help me do that. And her feeling like she had to like kind of make up for the fact that I had stretch marks. I don't know.
And so interesting too that you hadn't really gotten a lot of negative body messages from her before. So it's like this particular moment of postpartum is what brings it out, maybe.
Yeah. And again, I think it was because in her mind, she came out of each pregnancy looking a certain way. And I think that she expected that I would also look that way.
Totally. And impose that on you, like that expectation.
Yeah.
Have you been able to establish a better body image and a sense of boundary or limits with your mom around that?
Yeah. So that was probably like the only time that my mom has ever said anything or even like tried to change my body in a way. And she felt so awful afterwards, like once I fainted, that she was like, oh no, like that was it. She didn't try that with my second pregnancy. She's never been one to comment on my body. So that was kind of like a one time thing. Like she does say things. I shouldn't say she doesn't comment on my body. I'll take that back. She does say things here and there, and I have been able to like let her know. And sometimes even when we're in conversation, I'm able to kind of like educate her in a way that I don't think she's ever, and kind of like bring back or bring up a topic where she's never had to think about it that way. Again, it's the idea of that. I feel like our moms or grandmothers, like they didn't grow up in this culture that pushed back for the most part. Not when it came to like beauty standards and like, things like this. So for her, she never even had to think about it because she was also she fit the mold. She didn't hear a lot of talk about her body either growing up. So for her now as an adult, for me to like tell her these things about like, just the field that I work in, it's been very eye-opening to her. And the comments have stopped because I've been able to just kind of like tell her like, Mom, this is what like women are dealing with. And she's like, oh, like again, not anything that she's ever had to think about. And it does make her kind of reflect. And she's better. She's better about not commenting about other people's bodies. So that's good.
That's great. It sounds like her thin privilege kind of insulated her from all that.
Yeah, she never had to deal with that. So that's another thing. I think that in my family, we didn't really have to deal with that. And I would say that even though one of my brothers is definitely in a body that's different than the rest of us, I never, ever, ever heard my parents shame him ever or try to change him or tell him that he couldn't. Again, I feel very, very grateful that I grew up in a family that was very intuitive and not very body aware. It was just like not a thing.
It's amazing. I mean, the culture still gets you at some point.
Yeah, the culture there. Yeah. I still saw it everywhere, but it wasn't in my nuclear family.
Right. That makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And for you as a mom too, I'm sure you're modeling that for your kids.
Trying. Can't say that we're perfect.
Yeah. I mean, who is?
Exactly.
Well, I feel like this could be a whole separate podcast of like talking about raising kids as intuitive eaters and all of that. But I know you've got to get back to your kids because you're doing the whole remote schooling thing. So, yeah. But thank you so much. This has been such a great conversation. And can you let people know where to find you and learn more about your work?
Yeah. So the stomping you hear is the dino that I have in the background. But yeah, you can follow me at your.latina.nutritionist. So at your.latina.nutritionist. On Instagram. And that's kind of where talking shit on diet culture.
Yes. Yeah, we'll link to that in the show notes. We'll link to your website also so people can find you. And thank you so much again. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you, Christy.
So that is our show. Thanks again so much to Dalina Soto for joining us on this episode, and thanks to you for listening. If you've gotten something out of this podcast, please help us reach more people who need to hear the anti-diet message by sharing this episode and subscribing to the pod on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. You can see lots of different places to subscribe, if not all of them, at christyharrison.com/subscribe. That's christyharrison.com/subscribe. I think the podcast is available on other platforms in addition to those that I just don't know about because it kind of gets spread far and wide by lots of different podcatchers. But you can also leave us a nice rating and review in whatever your podcatcher of choice is, which is another way to help new listeners discover us and is always very much appreciated. If you're looking for some practical tips to help you get started on the anti-diet path for yourself, grab my free audio guide, 7 Simple Strategies for Finding Peace and Freedom with Food. Just go to christyharrison.com/strategies to get it. That's christyharrison.com/strategies. To get full show notes from this episode, including all the resources we discussed, all of those links I mentioned in the beginning, plus a full transcript, you can go to christyharrison.com/268. That's christyharrison.com/268. And to get the transcript, just scroll down to the bottom of the page and enter your email address. This episode was brought to you by my online course, Intuitive Eating Fundamentals. If you're ready to make peace with food, break free from diet culture, and reclaim the life it stole from you, learn more and sign up at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. A big thanks, as always, to our editor and sound engineer, Mike Lalonde, our community and content associate, Vinci Chue, our administrative assistant, Julianne Watasik, and our transcriptionist, Mycroft Holmes, for helping me out with all the moving parts that go into producing this show every week. Our album art was photographed by Abby Moore Photography and designed by Melissa Alam. Our theme song was written and performed by Carolyn Pennypacker Riggs, and I'm your host and producer, Christy Harrison. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay psyched.